The grand hall of the Vatrian citadel stretched high into the sky, its walls glowing faintly with the soft light of embedded crystals. The air inside was heavy with tension. Hundreds of Vatrians had gathered, their multi-limbed forms filling the chamber in silence. All eyes were fixed on the center platform where Princess Lyra stood, tall and composed despite the gravity of her situation. Her shimmering robes reflected the crystal light, casting a halo around her head. Every movement she made was precise, controlled, a picture of calm authority, but even the most disciplined observer could sense the weight of her predicament. Lyra had been accused of treason, a charge that in Vatrian law carried a sentence of death. The accusation was clear. She had secretly helped humans during the conflict over the mineral-rich systems in the Orion Quadrant. Humans were technically enemies of the Vatrian Empire, but Lyra had acted differently. She had seen humans not as foes, but as beings with intelligence, morality, and courage, traits that resonated with her ideals. Her actions had saved countless lives on both sides, yet here she was, facing judgment for doing what she believed was right. The High Council, a circle of the most powerful leaders in Vatra, hovered above the platform in suspended chairs. Their long, serpentine bodies curled gracefully around the chamber, faces lined with age and authority. Each counselor's eyes burned with a mixture of suspicion and anger as they regarded Lyra. Whispers floated among the assembly, the air thick with tension, disbelief, and barely concealed hostility. It was clear the council wanted an example. They wanted everyone to know that no one, not even a princess, could betray the empire without paying the ultimate price. In the audience, human delegates stood in silence, their expressions carefully neutral. Among them was Captain Jason Arden, a man who had walked the battlefield alongside Lyra during the brutal fights on Zeta Prime. He had seen her courage, her leadership, and her unwavering dedication to saving lives. Unlike the counselors, Jason did not see a traitor. He saw a hero. But he also knew that for a human to openly speak in Vatria's High Council could mean immediate death. Protocol was strict. Humans had no right to intervene in Vatrian politics. Still, he felt an undeniable pull toward action, a force stronger than fear. The chief counselor, a tall figure with golden scales and piercing violet eyes, spoke in a voice that resonated like a low chime. Princess Lyra, you are charged with betrayal against the Empire. You knowingly aided the human invaders, providing them with resources and information that allowed them to survive and fight against Vatrian forces. How do you plead? I have done what I believed was just, not what was convenient. Her words rippled through the chamber. Some gasped, others murmured. A few counselors' tails flicked in irritation. Her defiance was subtle but undeniable. The chief counselor's gaze sharpened. Your acts have endangered the Empire. You have compromised our authority and put countless Vatrians at risk. Punishment is necessary. The sentence is death. He knew that if he did nothing, she would die, and her actions, her bravery, would be erased by fear and tradition. Jason's decision crystallized in that moment. He could not, in good conscience, remain silent. He stepped forward, his boots clanging against the crystal floor, drawing a collective glance from both humans and Vatrians. Your counselors, he said, his voice firm, you are making a mistake. Princess Lyra saved countless lives. She acted with honor and courage. To condemn her is to punish righteousness itself. One of them hissed, human, you have no right to speak here. Leave or face immediate removal. You are on borrowed time. What evidence do you present to justify this defiance? I have first-hand accounts from dozens of others who witnessed her choices. She is a leader, not a traitor. The council deliberated in whispered hisses and flicks of their tails. Jason's intervention had thrown them into uncertainty. They were not accustomed to humans speaking with such moral clarity and unwavering courage. In many ways, it was unsettling. The council had relied on fear to maintain control, but here was a human, standing firmly on principle, forcing them to confront the truth beyond politics and tradition. One counselor rose, her silver-scaled head tilted thoughtfully. If this human speaks the truth, and Lyra's actions were indeed protective, how do we measure justice? Can the Empire continue to punish acts of compassion simply because they contravene orders? Morality is not confined to tradition. I stand here to defend Lyra because it is the right thing to do, and I will continue to speak the truth, no matter the consequences. I do not seek forgiveness for acting rightly, but I accept accountability. Let the council judge based on justice, not fear. A few of the more traditional counselors frowned, but they could not entirely dismiss the growing support for the princess. Jason's heart pounded. He knew this was only the beginning. Standing here, defying centuries of tradition, put him and Lyra at immense risk. Yet the fear was tempered by something stronger, the knowledge that standing for what was right was more powerful than standing silently under oppression. Outside the citadel, the city was already reacting. News of the trial and the humans' bold defense was spreading like wildfire. Citizens whispered in marketplaces, children listened to older siblings recount the events, and groups of humans and sympathetic aliens gathered to discuss the possibility that justice might prevail. Jason realized that the trial was no longer confined to the chamber. It was becoming a turning point for the planet itself. The chief counselor rose from his seat, his body tense with the weight of authority. "Captain Arden, your words are noted. You have presented evidence and argued passionately. The council will deliberate further. Until a final decision is reached, Princess Lyra will remain under guard, but her execution is suspended temporarily." Lyra's eyes softened briefly, gratitude flickering across her face. Jason allowed himself a small exhale of relief, though he knew the danger was far from over. Deliberation could take hours, days, or longer. Factions loyal to strict tradition would not easily forgive her defiance. As guards escorted Lyra back to her quarters, Jason followed, carefully maintaining a respectful distance. She turned to him briefly. "You risked much today, Captain. I did not expect a human to speak so boldly." "Then perhaps there is hope for our worlds yet," she said quietly. The chamber emptied slowly, leaving a lingering silence. Outside, the city's lights flickered as the evening descended. Jason looked up at the sky, dotted with distant stars. In that quiet moment, he understood that the trial was only the first step. Greater challenges awaited, challenges that would test their courage, morality, and ingenuity. But he also knew that with leaders like Lyra and with humanity's capacity for determination and honor, the impossible could become possible. The trial had begun, but the real battle, for justice, for life, and for the future, was only just starting. The corridors of the Vatrian citadel were cold and quiet, a stark contrast to the tension of the council chambers. Princess Lyra walked steadily, her steps measured, her mind racing with thoughts of strategy and survival. Guards flanked her, their multi-limbed forms moving silently, weapons at the ready. Despite the outward calm, Lyra felt the weight of the council's judgment pressing down on her. Every glance she exchanged with the guards reminded her of the fragile line between life and death. Captain Jason Arden followed at a careful distance, his boots echoing faintly against the crystalline floors. His mind was a whirlwind of plans and contingencies. Speaking in the council had been a risk, but it had also given him insight. There were council members who were not entirely against her, and there were Vatrians in the city who were beginning to see the possibility of justice. He knew that if they could reach these allies, they might find a way to turn the tide in Lyra's favor. Lyra's chambers were modest by royal standards, yet functional. Soft light from embedded crystals bathed the room in a warm glow. She stood by the window, gazing out at the city below. The streets were alive with whispers and hushed conversations. The trial had sparked interest far beyond the council chamber, and the citizens of Vatra were beginning to question what justice really meant. Jason approached cautiously. "The council is divided," he said quietly. "Some are sympathetic, some are just afraid to admit it. If we play this carefully, we can shift the balance in your favor." "I know, but truth and evidence can be powerful. We gather witnesses, people whose lives you saved. Soldiers, civilians, even humans who were here under the council's protection. Their testimonies can show that your actions were not betrayal, but courage. That might be enough to sway the council." "You are suggesting we challenge not only the council's authority, but also their perception of what is right. That is dangerous." They requested access to military logs, mission reports, and personal accounts from soldiers who had served under both human and Vatrian command. Some records were strictly classified, but Jason's reputation as a captain allowed him limited access. He moved with precision, knowing that time was a critical factor. They began with the soldiers. Many had witnessed Lyra's actions firsthand. The way she had shielded civilians during attacks, how she had negotiated temporary ceasefires, and how she had risked her own life to save those of both humans and Vatrians. Each story reinforced the same truth. Lyra was not a traitor, but a protector. One soldier, a tall Vatrian named Thalen, spoke with emotion. "I saw her stand between our troops and the humans, not to aid the enemy, but to prevent unnecessary deaths. She did not obey orders blindly. She acted with wisdom and compassion. That is a true leader. Every account, every detail of Lyra's bravery was another tool they could use to challenge the narrative of treason. Lyra herself spoke to citizens and council aides discreetly, demonstrating humility and transparency. She shared her reasoning, her fears, and her hopes for peace. Her words, honest and heartfelt, began to resonate with some members of the council who had initially been firm in their condemnation. They saw that her actions had been deliberate, calculated, and morally sound. But not all reactions were favorable. A faction of councilors remained hostile, their eyes sharp with suspicion and anger. They had no interest in the evidence, no desire to reconsider their judgment. They whispered among themselves, plotting ways to undermine the testimonies and discredit Jason's influence. They saw humans as a threat to the Vatrian way of life, and Lyra as a dangerous anomaly. Jason and Lyra anticipated this. They organized their efforts carefully, focusing on the undecided counselors, those who could be swayed by logic, morality, and evidence. They prepared statements, corroborated accounts, and gathered proof of her heroism. Every meeting was strategic, every conversation calculated to maximize impact while minimizing risk. Meanwhile, word of the trial and Jason's bold defense spread throughout the city. Citizens began to gather outside the citadel, quietly at first, but increasingly in numbers. Their presence was a subtle yet powerful message. The people were watching, and they cared about justice. News networks, holographic broadcasts, and local forums discussed the events of the trial, highlighting Jason's courage and Lyra's bravery. This public attention created pressure on the council. The more they ignored it, the more the narrative would shift against them. Jason understood this. Influence, he realized, was not only about evidence but also about perception. By demonstrating the people's support, they could force the council to consider justice more carefully. Yet, despite the momentum, danger lurked. Some councilors attempted to manipulate the situation, spreading false rumors and questioning the credibility of the witnesses. They framed Lyra's actions as reckless, claiming she endangered the Empire for personal reasons. These whispers threatened to undermine all of Jason and Lyra's efforts. Lyra, however, remained steadfast. She met every accusation with calm reasoning, every doubt with transparency. "I acted to save lives," she repeated in meetings and private discussions. "I weighed every decision. If my actions are considered treason, then so too must those who abandon morality for orders." These allies began to speak quietly in her favor, further strengthening her position. Jason also recognized that Lyra's greatest strength was her character. Humans and Vatrians alike respected bravery, intelligence, and moral clarity. Lyra possessed all three, and she demonstrated them consistently. Every act of courage, every decision guided by principle, added weight to their case. Days passed with the council in deliberation. Jason continued gathering evidence, organizing witnesses, and coordinating with allies both inside and outside the citadel. The atmosphere was tense, but each small victory, the addition of a sympathetic counselor, the support of a soldier, the attention of a public forum, built momentum. One evening, as the sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet, Jason and Lyra met in a quiet chamber away from the guards and counselors. The room was small, yet filled with soft light, giving it a sense of calm and safety. "You've done well," Lyra said, her voice soft but firm. "You've taken enormous risks to stand for me for what is right. I cannot thank you enough. That is rare in any species." The streets were quieter now, but the tension lingered. They knew the council's final decision was still pending, and the hostile faction would not relinquish their power easily. Yet there was hope. Evidence, courage, and integrity had begun to shift the tide. Lyra's allies had grown, the public was paying attention, and even some council members were beginning to see the truth. Jason knew that this was just the beginning. The real challenge lay ahead, maintaining momentum, countering the council's sabotage, and preparing for the possibility that the situation could escalate into violence. But for now, there was a brief sense of victory. Lyra had survived the initial verdict, and the council's eyes were beginning to open. Justice, fragile and uncertain, was taking its first steps. Jason and Lyra looked out the window together, the city below illuminated with soft crystal light. "Tomorrow, we continue," Lyra said. Jason nodded. "Tomorrow, we fight with truth and courage. And we win, not just for you, but for everyone who believes in what is right." And as they prepared for the coming days, Jason and Lyra understood that their journey had only just begun. A journey that would test their limits, challenge the council, and ultimately prove that honor, morality, and bravery were stronger than fear and prejudice. The morning air in the Citadel was tense, heavy with anticipation. Rumors had spread overnight. Some whispered that Lyra's supporters had gained the favor of undecided council members, while others insisted that the conservative faction would act swiftly to silence her before any progress could be made. The hallways buzzed with quiet activity. Guards patrolled with sharper vigilance, council aides moved with cautious urgency, and the hum of the Citadel's energy systems filled the gaps between whispered conversations. Princess Lyra stood in her chamber, preparing herself for what she knew might be the most dangerous day of her life. Her posture was calm, her breathing measured, yet her mind was alert. She reviewed the evidence she and Jason had collected, considering how to present it if the council attempted to cut the proceedings short. She knew that her fate rested on more than just facts. It rested on perception, courage, and the willingness of others to see the truth. Jason Arden leaned against the window frame, his eyes scanning the city below. He had been awake long before dawn, studying security patrols, noting patterns, and calculating risks. Every step they would take had to be precise. The council was unpredictable, and a single misstep could end the princess's life and potentially his own. Yet the human soldier's resolve remained unshaken. He had faced overwhelming odds before, but nothing compared to the stakes in the Citadel today. "Jason," Lyra said quietly, breaking the silence, "I fear that they will not give us the time we need. Some counselors are too rigid. If they move against us, there will be no warning. I've memorized patrol routes, studied the guard rotations, and identified access points. If they try to force an execution, we will not wait for permission. We will act. That is why we act quietly, quickly. We minimize risk and focus on getting you to safety. Once you are secure, we can continue to fight for justice openly." The alarm was brief, almost imperceptible, yet it carried a message. The council was moving faster than anticipated. The conservative faction was ready to take immediate action. "Now," Jason said, his voice low but firm, "we move." The walls were smooth, glowing softly with embedded crystals that bathed the passage in a dim, steady light. Every corner held the potential for discovery, every shadow a risk. Yet their movements were fluid, practiced, deliberate. As they moved deeper into the Citadel, Jason whispered the plan. "We reach the central command chamber. From there, we can access the transport elevators and exit the Citadel. We'll need to neutralize any guards who see us, but keep it quick and clean. We avoid unnecessary conflict." Jason pressed Lyra against the wall, signaling her to remain silent. He assessed the guards, noting their positions and movements. With precise timing, he launched a non-lethal stun device, temporarily disabling the first guard. The others reacted, but Jason moved swiftly, taking down each one with calculated efficiency. Lyra remained calm, observing and assisting where necessary, her agility and reflexes on full display. Once the corridor was clear, they continued, the tension thick in the air. Every step brought them closer to potential freedom, but also closer to discovery. They passed through a labyrinth of tunnels, each turn carefully chosen to avoid cameras and patrolling guards. Jason's planning paid off, every choice reducing risk and conserving their energy. Finally, they reached the central command chamber, a vast room filled with holographic displays, control consoles, and strategically placed security nodes. Jason quickly scanned the area, locating the transport elevators that would lead them outside. Lyra approached a console, her fingers moving deftly over the interface as she bypassed security protocols. The doors to the elevators slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a shaft that descended deep into the Citadel. Before they could step forward, alarms blared loudly throughout the chamber. The conservative faction had discovered their movement, and security forces were mobilizing. Jason grabbed Lyra's arm. "Go now." Outside, the city sprawled before them, alive and oblivious to the drama unfolding within the walls of the Citadel. Jason and Lyra moved quickly, staying in the shadows, blending with the occasional late-night patrols. Every step was cautious, every glance alert. They knew the Council's security forces could be waiting anywhere. Suddenly, a group of guards appeared ahead, blocking the only visible path to the exit. Jason assessed the situation. The guards were numerous, heavily armed, but not expecting a direct confrontation. He whispered a plan to Lyra. "We create a distraction. You draw their attention while I disable the security nodes behind them. Then we move to the secondary exit. The lights in the corridor flickered and went out temporarily, plunging the area into shadows. Confusion spread among the guards, who struggled to regroup in the sudden darkness. Using the cover, Jason and Lyra slipped past, moving quickly toward the secondary exit. They navigated a series of maintenance corridors, each step bringing them closer to the outer walls of the Citadel. The city outside was quieter now, but lights in the distance indicated that patrols were active. At last, they reached a maintenance door leading to the Citadel's perimeter. Jason tested the lock. It was secure but not impenetrable. Lyra knelt beside him, her hands moving with practiced skill over the interface. In moments, the lock disengaged and the door creaked open. The cool night air swept in, bringing with it the sense of the city and a small measure of relief. They moved quickly along the outer walls, sticking to shadows and using the terrain for cover. Below, the city streets were mostly empty, but occasional patrols forced them to pause and wait, their breath held in tense silence. Jason led the way, his experience in stealth operations guiding their path. Suddenly, a patrol vehicle rounded a corner, its headlights sweeping across the street below. Jason pressed Lyra against the wall, waiting for the light to pass. The vehicle continued on, oblivious to their presence, and they resumed their cautious journey. Every step required focus, every decision the difference between freedom and capture. Finally, they reached the outer perimeter of the Citadel, where the terrain dropped sharply into the city below. Jason glanced at Lyra, noting the exhaustion and determination etched on her face. "We're almost there. One more stretch, then we reach the safe house. After that, we regroup and plan our next move." Jason had prepared a route that avoided the main thoroughfares, and they moved quickly, silently, as shadows among shadows. As they approached the safe house, a small building tucked away in a quiet district, Jason felt a brief surge of relief. The immediate danger of the Citadel was behind them, though he knew the Council's reach extended far and wide. They could not stay here long, but for now they had a moment of respite. Inside the safe house, they paused to catch their breath. Lyra sank into a chair, her hands clasped in front of her. Jason checked the perimeter and secured the entrances, ensuring they were not followed. "You were brilliant," Lyra said after a moment, her voice steady but filled with quiet admiration. "Without your planning and courage, we would not have made it this far." Outside, the city continued its life, unaware of the escape that had just unfolded. Inside, the human and the alien princess shared a quiet understanding. The real battle was only beginning. The Council would not let this stand. They would pursue, they would plot, and they would attempt to reclaim control. But for the first time, Lyra and Jason had gained something more important than safety. They had demonstrated that courage, intelligence, and collaboration could defy even the most rigid traditions. As the night deepened, Jason turned to Lyra. "Tomorrow, we continue. We gather allies, we present evidence, and we make our case stronger than ever. The Council underestimated us, and now they will see the truth." And in that light, Jason and Lyra began to plan the next steps of their journey, a journey that would test their resolve, their courage, and the very principles they believed in. The safe house was quiet, but the air was heavy with anticipation. Outside, the city of Vatra slept, unaware that within its walls, a struggle for justice and truth was quietly unfolding. Inside, Princess Lyra and Captain Jason Arden moved with deliberate calm, knowing that the Council would soon discover her absence and that their escape had not gone unnoticed. Every second counted, and every decision mattered. Lyra studied the holographic map of the Citadel and its surroundings. Red markers indicated guard patrols, green markers represented secure paths, and blue lines showed possible escape routes and locations of sympathetic allies within the city. Her fingers traced the paths carefully. "We need to act quickly," she said. "If the Council mobilizes fully, they could isolate the city and cut off every route. We gather our allies, present the evidence, and force the Council to reconsider. If we act with precision and clarity, we can turn the situation to our advantage." Jason and Lyra had arranged discreet meetings in safe locations across the city. Each aide carried critical information, testimonies, and records of Lyra's actions. Together, they could form a coalition strong enough to influence the Council's decision. As they moved through the quiet streets, shadows clinging to the walls, Jason reflected on the magnitude of their task. This was no longer a simple defense. It was a battle for truth and morality against centuries of fear, prejudice, and rigid hierarchy. Yet, despite the danger, he felt a steady confidence. Lyra's presence was a reminder that courage and honor could inspire change even in the darkest circumstances. The first aide, a middle-ranking council clerk named Vash, greeted them cautiously. Princess Lyra. Captain Arden, I do not know what we can do, but I am willing to help. They may not have agreed, but they recognized your intent. The coalition of supporters grew quietly, their loyalty to justice outweighing their fear of authority. With every crystal, every testimony, they created a foundation of truth that could challenge even the most rigid counselors. As night deepened, Jason and Lyra returned to the safe house to review their gathered evidence. The room was filled with holographic projections, displaying logs, mission reports, and testimonies. Lyra studied each one meticulously, noting patterns, connections, and moments where her actions had clearly saved lives. "This is strong," she said finally. "If presented correctly, it will be difficult for the Council to deny the truth. We have clarity, integrity, and proof. And that is our strength. Fear relies on uncertainty, prejudice, and tradition. We have none of those weaknesses. We have facts and morality. That is more powerful than any weapon." Some counselors fumed, eager to punish what they saw as defiance, while others hesitated, weighing the evidence that was already beginning to circulate. Lyra and Jason entered the council chamber under guard, not as prisoners but as participants in the official session. Their presence was a bold statement. They were no longer hiding, no longer at the mercy of the council's authority alone. The chief counselor's eyes narrowed as they entered. "Princess Lyra, Captain Arden, you have returned. Do you intend to continue this defiance openly?" "The choice is yours." Some members were visibly shaken, reconsidering their stance in light of the growing evidence and public support. Others hardened their resolve, unwilling to appear weak or to compromise tradition. One counselor, an older Vatrian with silver scales and deep-set eyes, stood. "If what you say is true, then Princess Lyra's actions, while unorthodox, were intended to protect lives. But intent alone cannot excuse the defiance of orders. This is a debate about morality, courage, and integrity. Princess Lyra's loyalty to life and justice should not be punished, it should be recognized." Others argued that defiance, regardless of intent, must be punished to maintain authority. Then an unexpected voice spoke from the gallery. A young Vatrian soldier, previously hesitant, stood and addressed the council. "I witnessed Princess Lyra's actions firsthand. She saved civilians during the skirmishes on Zeta Prime. She acted bravely, and her choices saved lives. To punish her would be to punish courage itself." The chief counselor's gaze swept over the chamber, his expression unreadable. "The evidence is substantial, and the testimonies are compelling. Yet the decision cannot be made lightly. We must weigh the principles of the empire against the morality of the individual. It lies in courage, wisdom, and the willingness to act justly. If the empire punishes those who uphold these values, it is not strong, it is weak." Every act of courage, every piece of evidence, every testimony had built a foundation that could no longer be ignored. The council deliberated long into the day. Arguments were made, counter-arguments presented, and tensions ran high. Yet gradually, the voices favoring Lyra's defense grew stronger. The evidence was irrefutable, the testimonies consistent, and the moral clarity undeniable. Finally, after hours of discussion, the chief counselor spoke. "We acknowledge the evidence presented and the courage demonstrated by Princess Lyra. While her actions did contravene orders, they were guided by principle, morality, and a commitment to saving lives. Therefore, the Council has decided to suspend the execution and issue a conditional pardon." Lyra's lips curved into a small, controlled smile. Relief washed over her, tempered by the knowledge that this was not the end. The Council's decision was conditional, and the conservative faction would watch closely for any perceived misstep. Jason allowed himself a brief exhale of relief. The immediate threat of execution had been removed, and justice had prevailed, for now. Yet he knew that the path ahead would require continued vigilance, strategy, and courage. Lyra addressed the Council once more. "I accept this conditional pardon. I pledge to continue serving the Empire with integrity and courage. Let this be a lesson that morality, honor, and the protection of life are the true measures of leadership." Citizens outside the Citadel who had been quietly watching would soon learn that courage and justice could prevail even against the weight of centuries-old authority. As they left the chamber, Lyra turned to Jason. "We did it. The Council has acknowledged the truth, but this is only the beginning." There is still much to do to ensure that justice and morality guide the future of Vetra. Stars twinkled faintly in the sky above, a reminder that even in darkness there was hope, guidance, and the possibility of change. For the first time in days, Lyra allowed herself a moment of calm. She had faced the council, defied expectations, and emerged with her life and honor intact. Yet she knew that true leadership required more than survival. It required vision, courage, and the willingness to continue fighting for what was right. Jason placed a hand on her shoulder. The council has acted for justice today. Tomorrow we work to ensure that others will act with the same courage. That is how true change begins. Not just for us, but for every life that depends on morality, courage, and integrity. The Empire must learn that strength lies not in fear, but in honor. Together, they had faced the council, defied tradition, and shown that courage and truth could illuminate even the darkest corridors of power. The city of Vetra woke to a sense of cautious optimism. News of the council's decision had spread quickly, carried by messengers, broadcasts, and whispers through the streets. Citizens paused in their daily routines to discuss the events, their conversations filled with wonder and curiosity. For many, it was the first time they had witnessed courage and morality triumph over rigid tradition. For Princess Lyra and Captain Jason Arden, however, the work was far from over. Lyra emerged from the safe house early, her robes flowing softly as she moved with quiet determination. The night's victory was significant, but she knew the council's conditional pardon was fragile. Some members of the conservative faction still viewed her actions as dangerous precedent. She needed allies not just to secure her safety, but to ensure that the future of the Empire could be guided by reason and integrity. Jason followed closely, surveying the streets and rooftops, alert to any sign of danger. Even in the midst of hope, caution remained necessary. "The Council has relented," he said quietly, "but they are watching. We need to build a coalition strong enough to protect progress and prevent a backlash." One by one, they arrived in discreet locations around the city, bringing testimonies, records, and insights into the Council's deliberations. Each aide had witnessed Lyra's courage and humanity firsthand, and each was willing to speak truthfully, even at personal risk. "This is remarkable," Lyra said, reviewing the growing collection of evidence. "We have records from military operations, logs of humanitarian efforts, and testimonies from both humans and Vatrians. It is irrefutable. If presented properly, the Empire cannot ignore it. We need to reach them, convince them, and show that courage and justice are worth defending." Even some council members who had initially opposed her quietly shifted their stance, acknowledging that her choices were guided by morality, not self-interest. The growing momentum emboldened Lyra and Jason. They knew that the council's final decision could still go against them if they did not act decisively. So they planned a public session in the Citadel, where the evidence, testimonies, and arguments would be presented openly. This session would force the council to confront the truth in front of witnesses and the citizens, leaving little room for manipulation or suppression. The Citadel chamber was filled with anticipation when Lyra and Jason arrived. The council members were seated, their expressions a mixture of apprehension and authority. Outside, citizens gathered quietly, observing from elevated platforms and city windows. News of the session had traveled fast, and the public's attention added pressure on the council to act with integrity. Lyra stepped forward, her voice steady and confident. "Honored councilors, I stand here not to challenge your authority, but to present the truth of my actions. Every choice I made was guided by the principles of justice, courage, and the protection of life. I ask you to consider these facts, not through the lens of fear, but through the lens of morality." Holographic projections displayed logs of operations, accounts from soldiers, and records of humanitarian missions. Testimonies from citizens and allies appeared alongside them, each story reinforcing the narrative of Lyra's integrity. The council murmured among themselves, some members clearly impressed, others struggling to reconcile tradition with truth. The conservative faction attempted to interject, questioning the relevance of testimonies and the validity of records. Yet Jason remained composed, countering each challenge with calm reasoning and factual evidence. One counselor, previously silent, finally spoke. "If what you present is accurate, Princess Lyra's actions, while unconventional, were driven by honor and the protection of life. The evidence is compelling." Soldiers and aides nodded in quiet agreement. Even some council members who had been hesitant found themselves reconsidering their position. The weight of public scrutiny, combined with undeniable evidence, made resistance increasingly untenable. After hours of discussion, the chief counselor rose. His golden scales glimmered under the chamber lights as he addressed the assembly. Princess Lyra, Captain Arden, the council has reviewed the evidence, the testimonies, and the arguments presented today. It is clear that Lyra's actions were guided by principle, not betrayal. Her courage and integrity are undeniable. Furthermore, we recognize her contributions to the empire and mandate reforms to ensure that courage and morality are valued alongside obedience in leadership. Let this decision serve as a precedent. Honor and justice shall guide our actions. Relief washed over Lyra, but she remained composed, understanding that victory was not measured by applause but by the opportunity to effect lasting change. Jason allowed himself a small smile, though his vigilance remained. They were not entirely safe, but the immediate threat had passed. Outside the citadel, the citizens erupted in quiet celebration. Word spread quickly through the city, inspiring hope and a renewed sense of possibility. People who had felt powerless now saw that courage and integrity could influence even the highest authority. Lyra and Jason had not only survived, they had set a precedent for justice and moral leadership. In the following weeks, Lyra and Jason worked tirelessly to implement reforms within the council. They trained new leaders, guided military strategies with a focus on protection and morality, and established clear channels for citizens to voice concerns without fear. The empire began to shift, slowly but steadily, toward a system that valued courage, intelligence, and ethical decision-making. Jason reflected on the journey they had undertaken. Humans were often underestimated in the galaxy, seen as fragile or reckless. Yet time and again, human courage, intelligence, and moral clarity had proven decisive. Standing alongside Lyra, he realized that these traits were not just individual virtues, they were tools that could change the course of history. Lyra, too, felt the transformation within the empire. Her actions, once condemned, were now celebrated as examples of true leadership. She continued to act with humility and wisdom, guiding the council, inspiring soldiers, and supporting citizens. She had survived the trial, defied expectations, and now shaped the future. One evening, as the sun set over the crystal-lit city, Jason and Lyra stood on a balcony overlooking the streets below. The city was alive, vibrant, and filled with citizens who had begun to believe in the power of courage and justice. "You were remarkable," Jason said quietly. "You faced the council, defied tradition, and inspired change. Humans are honored to have stood with you. Your courage gave me strength when I needed it most. Together, we have shown that honor and morality can prevail, even against the weight of centuries-old authority. That is a legacy worth fighting for. The galaxy will see that strength lies not in fear, but in honor." Their journey had tested their courage, loyalty, and intelligence, and through it all, they had proven that humans and those who act with integrity could change the course of history. Outside the citadel, the stars shone bright and steady, a reminder that even in the vastness of the galaxy, light could guide the way. Citizens of Vetra would remember this moment, the trial, the escape, the courage of a princess, and the loyalty of a human soldier. It was a story of bravery, justice, and the enduring power of morality. Lyra and Jason knew that challenges would continue to come. The empire was vast, and fear and prejudice would never disappear entirely. But they also knew that truth, courage, and honor could inspire change far greater than any fear. Together, they had achieved what many thought impossible, a victory of morality over rigid authority, courage over fear, and justice over oppression. And as the night deepened over the city, the two heroes stood side by side, ready to face the future with unwavering determination. The story of Lyra and Jason would become legend, a reminder to all that even in the darkest times, morality, courage, and human ingenuity could illuminate the way forward, shaping a galaxy guided by justice, honor, and hope.